In the mid-2010s, as the Islamic State attempted to expand across the nations of Iraq and Syria, they rapidly sought out new members who could join their ranks. The terrorists proceeded to launch a massive social media campaign and fed their propaganda to those who were most vulnerable. Those targeted were amongst the most at-risk members of society, men and women who felt alienated or marginalized by society, or those who felt they were suffering from a lack of purpose in life. This was all worryingly successful. Tens of thousands of individuals from across the world either took to the Middle East to join ISIS through a conversion with a recruiter, or they remained in their home countries, where they could, amongst other things, act as recruiters themselves. While the most seriously affected by ISIS propaganda included young Muslim males in their early to mid-20s, every demographic was at risk of becoming indoctrinated by the terrorists. One such story from the recruitment drive is that of Sally Ann Jones, a British woman who became lured in by the Islamic State's propaganda. In 2013, Jones would make a decision that would greatly alter the course of her life, as she boarded a plane bound for Syria. What awaited her there was a whole new underworld of terror plots, wanted insurgents, and violent atrocities. Today we will be taking a look at what we know of the life of Sally Ann Jones. Who was this seemingly ordinary yet deeply disturbed woman that took to Syria in order to join the ranks of the Islamic State? How did her life play out when she eventually made that choice? And ultimately, what became of her in the end? Join us today as we look at all of these questions and more. Welcome to Wars of the World. While she endured several hardships growing up, there was nothing in Sally Ann Jones' early life that would suggest that as an adult she would make the choices that she did. She was born and lived for most of her childhood in Greenwich, a generally affluent suburb in southeast London. Her mother and father brought her up as Catholic, and Jones spent her spare time in the Catholic youth groups around town. Underneath this seemingly idyllic lifestyle, however, were growing problems with her parents that Sally Ann Jones could not have controlled. Jones's parents underwent a messy divorce when she was just 10 years old, which unfortunately led to her father taking his own life soon after. With her life plunged into disarray so fast and so young, Jones did her best to carry on. Jones would remain enrolled in school until the age of 16, at which point she found a job selling cosmetics for L'Oreal. Leaving Greenwich behind, she eventually settled in Chatham, Kent, where she lived in council housing. Life was by no means easy for Sally, and she soon found herself to be barely scraping by with the money she was making. She found solace during these hard times through her hobby of music, and she formed a punk band named Crunch with a few friends in the 1990s. With money being so tight, however, she is thought to have been living on welfare benefits, and would often visit a food bank in order to see herself through. When she had moved away from Greenwich, Sally Ann Jones would soon give birth to her first child, a baby boy. He was born in 1996, and for a while Jones dated the father, until he unfortunately passed away 3 years later. Not long after her first partner's death, Sally would enter into a new relationship, and she would have her second child, a boy named Jojo. Jojo was born in 2004, and although life was difficult, Sally Ann Jones would do her best to support him. When Jones would begin struggling financially, she took to the internet in order to seek answers. Feeling more down and out than ever, she developed an unhealthy interest in conspiracy theories and began looking into the history and practices of black magic. The 1990s passed, soon followed by the 2000s, and very little had changed for Jones. She continued to struggle making ends meet, and as a result, continued to seek solace online. It's unclear exactly how she began to develop an interest in radical jihadist agenda, but it likely sprung up as a result of this near-constant exposure to conspiracy-related media online. It's believed that the Iraq War and Sally's disdain for it may have pushed her into taking the plunge towards extremism. The ISIS recruiters would target online forums discussing topics surrounding the Iraq War, luring in vulnerable people and convincing them to sign up. And soon, this is exactly what would happen to Sally Ann Jones. The details of exactly how Sally Ann Jones would sign up with the Islamic State are still not clear, but what we do know is that it happened quickly, throughout the course of 2013. This year was a major turning point for ISIS. They had recently expanded into Syria after taking hold of territorial gains in Iraq, and they were launching the start of their notorious recruitment drive. While recruiters targeted internet users worldwide, in the Middle East, the extremists were continuing to expand, seemingly stopping at nothing in order to establish themselves as a caliphate. It was early on in 2013 when a 45-year-old Sally Ann Jones, during a routine evening of browsing radical Islamic forums on her computer, that she came into contact with a man by the name of Junaid Hussain. Hussain was a prolific hacker and propagandist for the Islamic State. He was a charismatic spokesperson for the terrorist organization, with a long history of targeting those most vulnerable in society and convincing them to join up with ISIS. He was well integrated into British society, despite his involvement with the Islamic State, and he lived in a quiet suburb in Birmingham. He had, however, recently been released from a stint in prison, following his role in a cyber attack launched on the counter-terrorism hotline in 2012. When recruiting new members for ISIS, Hussain would focus on perceived injustices against Muslims in the UK, encouraging those who felt marginalised by Western society to take back what was theirs, often by force. Hussain would soon become the face of ISIS's online recruitment drive, and the extremist forums he frequented soon caused him to cross paths with Sally Ann Jones. The two of them bonded fast, and actually entered into a romantic relationship. It is not thought that they actually met up in person during these early stages of their relationship, but Hussain was soon able to get his extremist tendrils into Jones's already at-risk mind. The two would speak over voice chat for hours on end, over which time Hussain would slowly contribute to his partner's radicalization. Sally had already converted to Islam just before the relationship commenced, but after a few months of getting to know Hussain, she was starting to go down a particularly dark path. Then, one day in late 2013, after what would have been months of meticulous planning, Hussain and Jones departed for the Middle East. Hussain opted to physically join his associates in the Islamic State within Syria, and he decided to take Jones with him. According to a later statement from Jones, who'd been duped into answering questions regarding her trip to Syria by a Sunday Times journalist posing as an ISIS recruit, she had married Hussain on the very first day they had arrived. The two would adopt new monikers once they had married. Hussein was now going by Abu Hussein al-Brittani, and similarly, Jones had adopted Hussein al-Brittani. Now what happened to the couple next is unclear, but we know that it was certainly tumultuous. Jones and Hussein initially landed in the Syrian city of Idlib, and following their wedding, it would take a while for them to arrive in the terrorist cell they intended to reach in Raqqa. This was due to an incident that took place shortly after they arrived, in which Hussein and Jones were kidnapped along with ISIS recruit Abdel Majed Abdel Bari. Bari, a prolific social media user throughout the course of his time enrolled with the Islamic State, took to Twitter in February of 2014 to say, quote, "Me and Abu Hussein al-Brittani got kidnapped and tortured by FSA/IF scum. They stole our 4 AKs and a 7mm, my vehicle and our phones and cash." The FSA in question refers to the Free Syrian Army, a coalition of Syrian rebel groups that formed in 2011 in resistance to the Syrian president Bashar al-Assad's crackdown on protesters. Sally Ann Jones would address the kidnapping situation herself on Twitter, when the trio were eventually released from the Free Syrian Army's custody in August of 2014. She said, quote, "Alhamdulillah, me and my husband made it to the Islamic State after being stuck in Idlib for 7 months, and we are now living in the Khilafah." Now stationed where they had initially intended to be in Raqqa, the couple set to starting their lives anew in the de facto capital of the world's most dangerous terrorist organization of the time. Once Hussein and Jones had settled in Raqqa, their identities would soon be revealed by Jones's aforementioned unintentional interview with the Sunday Times. Posing as a prospective recruit for the Islamic State, journalist Depesh Ghudda managed to unveil the birth names of both Hussein and Jones, who prior to this had been using their al-Brittani monikers. Ghudda also managed to reveal that Jones had been working as a prominent ISIS propagandist in the months that followed her move to Syria, and that she had also taken her youngest son Jojo with her. While Jones had established herself as a leading ISIS recruiter, her husband had other plans. Hussein had made a name for himself in recruiting and coaching hackers that could be useful to them in launching the Islamic State's many online attacks. It wasn't long before the couple became sensationalized by the British tabloid media. The story of the white female punk guitarist who ran away to join a jihadist terrorist cell with a husband 25 years her junior was just too good to pass up on. Jones and Hussein were fully aware of the hysteria caused by the unveiling of their identities, but they attempted to make it work in their own favor. Both of them would be very prominent and vocal on Twitter, where they would quote religious texts, troll other Twitter users, and encourage new members to relocate to the Islamic State territories in the Middle East. Hussein, with Jones at his side, would proceed to found a group that became known as the Legion, a group of a dozen British ISIS members who started a massive online recruitment program to reel in as many English-speaking recruits to the Islamic State as possible. Thousands of internet users were reached in this manner, and ISIS were not subtle in their approach. The world knew of their predatory methods to obtain new members, but they weren't about to stop anytime soon. While in Syria, Hussein is believed to have been instrumental in the carrying out of multiple attempted terror attacks in both the United States and the United Kingdom. He had mentored a terrorist by the name of Munir Abdul Qadir and discouraged him from travelling to Syria. Instead, he instructed him to kidnap and kill a member of the United States military. Everything was scheduled to go ahead in mid-2015, but Abdul Qadir would be arrested and imprisoned for 20 years before the attack could be carried out. On the 25th of August, 2015, Hussein's life would come to an end, as United States military carried out a drone strike on his position in Raqqa. The strike would hit as Hussein was in a car at a petrol station in Raqqa, in what was deemed a major success for anti-ISIS coalition forces. Several attempts had been made on Hussein's life following the unveiling of his identity, and as a grim safety measure, he would often take Sally's son, Jojo, out with him as a human shield. Both Jones and Hussein were guilty of using Jojo in this manner, and the day Hussein was killed is thought to have been one of the few occasions where he ventured out in public without the boy by his side. While Jones initially used Twitter to deny all reports of her husband's death, she would soon change her tune, possibly when she realized that she could spin the attack as a propaganda tool. Taking to Twitter once again, Jones wrote that Junaid Hussein had been killed by, quote, the greatest enemy of Allah. With Hussein now dead, Jones seemed even more committed than ever to her incredibly dangerous choice of joining the Islamic State, and she continued to spread pro-ISIS propaganda from her new home in Syria. Sally's actions online continued to draw in the attention of the British public and media, and Jones would soon find herself being placed on the United Nations Most Wanted list. United Kingdom Prime Minister David Cameron would personally request that Jones be placed on the list, in what would be the first time that any country had placed one of its own citizens on a list of people affiliated with the Islamic State. Sally Ann Jones was forthright in her response to being made a wanted woman. On Twitter, she declared that she would continue to fight England, quote, until her last breath, and she only proceeded to ramp up her involvement in spreading the Islamic State's propaganda. ISIS themselves welcomed her presence, and she soon became a major face of the terrorist organization's global drive to attract new members. She also soon found herself taking on a growing list of even more sinister duties for the organization, including acting as a major leader for a secret terrorist battalion. The Anwar al-Awlaki Battalion, named after the late radical jihadist of the same name, appointed Jones as its secret female wing's leader. Now Jones would be the first person any European woman who insisted to join ISIS would encounter, and upon their arrival in Syria, these women would directly be trained by her. Jones taught these female ISIS recruits on topics relating to weapons and military tactics, despite her apparent lack of experience in these fields. Those she trained would become known as the Muhajirat, who were used to carry out terrorist attacks in the West. Theoretically, the Muhajirat would be trained in Syria by Jones, before they would then return to their home countries to partake in deadly suicide attacks. The Counter-Extremism Project believes that Sally Ann Jones may have recruited hundreds of women to join ISIS from Britain alone, and she continued to become progressively more vocal about her beliefs on Twitter as time progressed. In 2016, Jones took to her social media accounts to request that any female ISIS sympathizers in Britain who had not yet signed up for their cause to carry out terrorist attacks in the British cities of London and Glasgow, as well as across the country of Wales. This would coincide with the Muslim fasting period of Ramadan, creating an uneasy atmosphere for the general public both in the United Kingdom and beyond. following her continued rise to power amongst ISIS's ranks after the death of her husband. The British press decided to colloquially dub her as the White Widow, a nickname that stuck for the rest of her life. Jones's duties within the ranks of the Islamic State did not stop at recruiting. According to United States court documents that were made available in the spring of 2017, Jones would have been instrumental in orchestrating over a dozen terrorist attacks on foreign soil. Thankfully, many of these plots would be foiled before they could make their impact. But that didn't stop the White Widow from trying time and time again. She would become just as aggressive towards the United States as she was towards the United Kingdom, and actually published 3 lists online of individuals in the United States military that she wanted ISIS terrorists to target. She would often post the personal information of military personnel online and encourage her jihadists to track them down and eliminate them. Of course, this would draw massive attention from the United States government, and soon she was a high-profile wanted woman on both sides of the Atlantic. As Sally Ann Jones continued to publish her kill lists and encourage terrorist attacks to be carried out across the Western world, she drew in a great amount of notoriety. Coalition forces, spearheaded by the United States military in their Operation Inherent Resolve, had already been conducting airstrikes in both Iraq and Syria in order to stamp out the threat of ISIS in the Middle East. Now, however, Jones had made herself a target. She remained in Raqqa, the de facto capital of the Islamic State, despite the surmounting international attention she was attracting. The capital had become a major target for United States airstrikes, and several high-profile terrorists, including Mohammed Emwazi, also known as Jihadi John, had been killed in Raqqa in the months and years prior. During October of 2017, it was reported by the British Daily Mirror that Sally Ann Jones and the now 12-year-old Jojo had been killed in an airstrike carried out by the United States military in Raqqa. Reportedly, she had been attempting to flee the area as the drones launched their missiles down on the terrorist-occupied city, and she had met her end as she made her way out of a building. Supposedly, at the time she died, she had been planning to relocate to the town of Mayadin in eastern Syria. Reportedly, this had happened in June of 2017, but claims of Jones' death could never be fully confirmed. DNA evidence was never recovered from the scene of the airstrike after the smoke had cleared, and although her Twitter accounts have ever since remained inactive, there is a small chance that she may have made it away from the airstrikes and on to Mayadin. Likewise, Jojo's death was never fully confirmed. When the airstrikes were reported, the action to launch them was brought under fire, and the boy was only 12 years old, and thus could not be considered a combatant. Despite this status, there remains speculation that Jojo could have been involved in Jones's crimes in Syria, especially after concerns arose regarding a video in 2016. The video in question showed 5 young boys shooting another 5 Kurdish prisoners in the back of their heads. One of these young boys, according to one of Jones's former partners, was Jojo. When the spotlight was cast on the young boy, Jones released a comment insisting that none of the boys depicted were her son. Despite her statement, however, there is a heavy speculation that Jojo was being raised as an ISIS child soldier throughout his short life, and having been taken to the Islamic State from such a young age, he was likely radicalized too. Reports of Jojo's death actually came under suspicion in November of 2017, when official Syrian sources claimed that he was still alive, possibly living with surviving members of ISIS close to the country's eastern border with Iraq. Unfortunately though, there is no way to officially confirm this claim in either way. In 2018, however, journalist Dipesh Gudda, who had been conversing with Jones disguised as a recruit, noted that he had been in contact with an informed source, who told him that the deaths of both Jones and her son Jojo were, quote, 99.9% certain. Another source from British ISIS terrorist Alexander Coty, otherwise known as Jihadi George, claimed that Jones had already escaped Raqqa at the time of the airstrike that supposedly killed her. According to Coty, she had settled in Mayadin in early 2017, but had been killed in the shelling of a government building on the 25th of May. While Jones was considered a dangerous terrorist, several non-profit organizations have condemned the United States military's decision in organizing the airstrike that ultimately killed her. According to the International Committee of the Red Cross, Jones may not have met all of the criteria for her to be considered an official member of ISIS. But this boils down to the idea that, considering she did not hold a continuous combat function, and was not perpetuating these physical attacks herself, her killing may have been unethical. Amnesty International, one of the world's leading human rights organizations, also corroborated this, noting that the killing of Jones, as well as her son Jojo, was questionable in the eyes of the law. Many organizations, as well as the general public and the Western government she had threatened, did not share these sentiments when the airstrikes were announced. Despite the controversy though, and the conspiracy surrounding her death, it would appear very likely that Jones was indeed killed in the June 2017 Raqqa airstrike. Her Twitter accounts, which were formerly very prolific in posting, almost instantly became inactive following her reported death, and nothing more has been heard from her following the eventual collapse of the Islamic State in Baghouz, Syria, in 2019. Her death marked an end to the terrifying consequences of a radicalized recruitment in the United Kingdom, but she was not the only one to be drawn in by its clutches. Remarkably, Sally Ann Jones was not even the only jihadist convert to have been dubbed with the White Widow moniker by the press. Samantha Lewthwaite, from Banbridge in Northern Ireland's County Down, was another British citizen to have been drawn in by the twisted methods of extremist recruiters, and she joined the Somalia-based Islamic militant group Al-Shabaab in the late 2000s or early 2010s. Lewthwaite converted to Islam at the age of 17 and adopted the name Sharafia Lewthwaite, a name that she would carry forward to her life as an extremist in the 2010s. Lewthwaite's path to extremism was also centered around her marriage. She met radical Islamist Jermaine Lindsay online and married him in the October of 2002. 3 years later, Lindsay would blow himself up in the infamous London 7/7 terror attacks, targeting a train travelling from London's King's Cross to Russell Square. 26 civilians were killed as a result of his actions, and Lewthwaite, denying any prior knowledge of the plot, reported Lindsay as missing 6 days later. At the time, she was the mother to Lindsay's 14-month-old son, and was carrying his unborn daughter at the time. Lewthwaite sold the story of her husband's terror attack to the tabloid press, and she came under criticism as a result. Following the death of Lindsay, Lewthwaite met Habib Saleh Ghani, a Pakistani member of the Al-Shabaab terrorist group. She moved to Kenya with him in 2007 and was believed to have made her way to Somalia by the end of the 2000s. Both the British and the Kenyan governments began to suspect that Lewthwaite was involved with the activity of terrorists by the time she had made it to Somalia. And sure enough, by the early 2010s, her name had been linked to a series of major attacks. In July of 2012, Lewthwaite would be named as one of the leading suspects in a grenade attack that had been carried out in a bar in Mombasa, Kenya, only a month prior. During the attack, bar attendees had been watching a Euro 2012 football match when the blast was detonated, killing 3 and injuring 25 more. A woman matching her exact description was seen leaving the bar just before the blast went off, and police heavily suspected that Lewthwaite was involved. Then, in the September of 2013, Lewthwaite was named once again as one of the terrorists suspected of carrying out an attack in the Westgate shopping mall in Nairobi, Kenya. This horrific incident saw 4 gunmen killing 71 people in the mall and injuring a further 200. While Al-Shabaab claimed that the attack was solely the doing of young men, the media heavily speculated that Lewthwaite could have been involved in the planning. Her actions, considering that she had also lost her husband in a terrorist attack, earned her the nickname the White Widow in the media, and despite her actions in the 2010s, she has not been heard of in many years. As of 2022, her uncle believed she was dead, but there is some speculation that she may have been hiding somewhere in Somalia or Tanzania. While Lewthwaite was not affiliated with the Islamic State, many more British converts would be. Amongst them was Tarina Shakil, a woman who would later be convicted of travelling to Syria to join ISIS. Alarmingly, it was potentially Sally Ann Jones herself who would persuade Shakil to take the leap into joining the terrorists in Syria, as it was proven that the two had communications prior to her arrival in the Middle East. She was also radicalized by Portuguese ISIS fighter Fabio Poucas, who had been responsible for orchestrating kidnappings and executions of prisoners in the Islamic State. Shakil's story, however, ends on a very different note. Shakil flew to Syria by way of Turkey from the United Kingdom's East Midlands airport in October of 2014. With her, she took her newborn son and told her friends she was going on a beach holiday. Once she arrived in the Islamic State-controlled territory, she sent a message back home informing her friends and family that she would not be returning to Britain, but rather that she would be killing the apostates of Islam and dying as a martyr in the process. She described the journey as her jihad and encouraged others to fight for ISIS alongside her. Shakil also spent her time in Syria within Raqqa, and would often post photos online of her posing with the ISIS flag. Her child, too, would become indoctrinated by the extremists, and would appear online holding an AK-47 assault rifle, whilst wearing an Islamic State balaclava. Shakil would later report that she instantly believed she had made a mistake in travelling to ISIS-controlled lands. She attempted to contact the police, but within the Islamic State, nobody would come to her aid. She took the chance to leave Raqqa during one of the many airstrikes carried out on the city by coalition forces, and fled back the way she had come. She bribed a taxi driver to take her to the Turkish border with Syria, and surrendered to the Turkish border guards who had intercepted her on the other side. She was securely flown back to the United Kingdom's Heathrow airport, and was immediately arrested upon her arrival. Shakil would initially tell the police that she had been kidnapped by ISIS's forces, and denied allegations that she had attempted to indoctrinate her son with Islamic State propaganda. However, enough evidence was present to prove that she had travelled to Syria by her own free will, and the court saw the images of her posing with assault rifles and the ISIS flag. She would ultimately be sentenced to 4 years imprisonment for being a member of the Islamic State, and for encouraging acts of terror to be carried out. The judge criticised Shakil for lying during the trial, and for attempting to indoctrinate her son as a terrorist fighter. Shakil would be released from prison in 2018, and has since spoken out against her former actions. In 2021, she claimed that she regrets traveling to Syria, and that she was ashamed of her actions in the mid-2010s. She has given interviews on an ITV documentary about her life, entitled Tarina: Return from ISIS, and she has been active on social media following her release. While the Islamic State may have been defeated by coalition forces, the threat of radicalization is still present. Sally Ann Jones was a highly manipulative agent of terror who targeted those most vulnerable to get them to sign up with an unimaginably dangerous lifestyle. Her online presence ultimately attracted hundreds to begin anew with the world's most dangerous terrorist organization, and her choices have left a grim and long-lasting warning sign on the British public. Every year, an estimated 7,000 to 9,000 individuals are referred to the United Kingdom's PREVENT programme, which aims to target and stamp out the threat of radicalisation in all of its forms across the country. Their emphasis has been placed heavily on spotting the signs of radicalisation before it can take place. This involves watching for sudden changes in behaviour in those close to you, or looking out for anybody justifying the use of violence in a political context. Many sources and subjects can cause people to become radicalised in the modern day, and it's important to look beyond Islam when attempting to spot those who may be at risk. Sally Ann Jones's life represents one of the more chilling chapters in the Islamic State's thankfully short-lived history. Though her life likely came to an end in 2017, she serves as an uneasy reminder that nobody is safe from the clutches of radicalization when the circumstances are right. Thank you for watching today's video. If you found it informative, please leave a like or a comment down below. All of our content, from the research and script writing to the editing and narration, is completely human-driven, without the use of AI. So if you want to support our channel, consider subscribing and use the bell icon to get notifications on when the next Wars of the World video is released. Thank you for watching.